Welcome back to Living Like a G. I feel like I haven't been on Living Like a G for a while, and I'm sorry about that. I'm glad I'm back, and I'm glad you're back. And I have a really funny story, kind of funny, kind of just like typical industry situation. This is basically my story on how I met Pitbull. And you can believe me that I did, or you can believe me that I didn't. Doesn't really matter to me. I know that I did. In fact, I have his number in my phone. Um, but yeah, this is like a perfect example of like law of attraction to a T, honestly. So basically, I was in Miami and I ended up at this restaurant, Grails. And my manager knows all the people that work at Grails, and that started it. If you're in Miami, you probably know what Grails is. It's in Wynwood. And so I end up at this place. It's kind of like a poppin' thing on a, Friday, Saturday night. We get like a table and I'm like, oh, cool. Like a table, me, like, I'm like, oh, coming from the trailer park, but this is nice, whatever. Like, do I put my feet on the table? Like, whatever. Cause the seats were lower, by the way. And, anyways, I get to talking to one of the owners of the restaurant, and we just hit it off. We just become like such good friends, like in an instant. Like sometimes that just happens with people, and we are just shooting the crap back and forth. We are just like having the greatest time ever. And I start talking about like degrees of separation, how really in life, nobody's further than 7 degrees of separation from someone. And what that means is that, let's say you wanted to get in contact with Beyonce, right? You could reverse engineer who Beyonce knows and who that person knows and that person knows and that person knows, and goes all the way back. And you could figure out a way to find your connection to Beyonce through at least 7 people. The most 7 people, right? Not at the least, at the most 7 people. And I was telling him, in our careers and how long we've been doing this, it's probably only 1 or 2, and you just have to figure out who's that key person that you know to get connected to whoever you're trying to get connected to. And all of a sudden he looks at me, and it was like silent for a second. And like, like it's silent for a second, you're like, shoot, I must have said something wrong. I must have made a bad joke or like said something offensive or something. And he goes, dude, I never do this, but like, would you want to meet Pitbull? And I was like, I mean, no pressure, but like, hell yeah. I want to meet Pitbull. What do you mean? So I was like, for real? And he goes, yeah, he's here tonight. He's in this back room. Like, I can get you in there, but like, you got to start the conversation. I said, okay. So I've worked with a bunch of his people already. Like I work a lot with Montana Tucker. And so I was like, cool. I already know how the conversation will start. Just being like, yeah, I work with Montana. And he'd be like, oh, great. Right? Easy. So he gets me in the room, and it's kind of like a big room, and then he's in a tiny room. So I'd have to walk into this like tinier room, which is more exclusive. And I'm looking through these like curtains, right? Just like peeking through the curtains. And I'm like, is that Pitbull? And he's like, that's Pitbull right there. And I'm thinking to myself, is it? Because I'm looking at a guy with an afro and an aviator suit on. And I'm like, is that Pitbull? Because when you think of Pitbull, what do you think of? You think of a bald dude, light-skinned, like the glasses, right? So I finally have stared at him long enough where I'm like, you know what? I think that is Pitbull. So I get my manager and I'm like, yo, we're going to go meet Pitbull. So he goes, okay. So we walk in there, and I go, hi, Mr. Pitt. Mr. Pitt. That's literally what I said. I'm not even like, I said, hi, Mr. Pitt. So nice to meet you. Don't mean to disturb your night, but I work a lot with your girl, Montana Tucker, and whatever. So he stands up, and again, I'm looking at a guy with an afro on. Okay. And he's like, oh my gosh, I love Montana. Like, she's so great. And I said, yeah, she is. And we're just talking about it. He's like, oh, how did you meet her? And then it, naturally leads into like, I'm in the music industry. I write pop music. And so he starts dropping like knowledge on me. Such a sweet guy. Starts dropping so much knowledge on me. He's like, you got to make sure you own your stuff. Like, don't let a label take your percentages. Like, he's going through all the thing. And then halfway through, he's like, you can't take me seriously. And he's like, you can't take me seriously with this on or whatever. So he takes his afro off or whatever. Mind you, the whole reason why he's even wearing basically a costume is because it's the day before Halloween. So he is dressed up in a costume that's like an afro, aviators. He's got a pilot jumpsuit on that says 0 F's given on the side. And finally he takes off his like afro and he's like, you can't take me seriously, whatever. So we end up hitting it off. And he goes, he was like, I'm working on these albums. He was like, I believe everything happens for a reason. He's like, but I'm working on these albums and we've got the Latin and the R&B stuff figured out, but we really need pop and country. And I was like, well, I lived in Nashville for 3 years. I do pop. I'm like, that's right up my alley. I can crush that. And so he gets my information. He's like, I will call you tomorrow. He's like, I don't have my phone on me right now, but if you give me your like information on a napkin, a card, whatever, he's like, I will call you tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I give him all my information. I'm thinking, if he calls me, cool. If he doesn't, cool. I still got to meet Pitbull, right? Well, then one of my friends, who's another artist that we hang out with all the time, is looking for the bathroom and bumps into Pitbull again. And they start talking. So then my manager's like, oh my gosh, you just bumped into my other artist. So then he's like, dude, we were meant to spend the whole night together. So he's like, all right. So we basically end up spending the whole night with Pitbull. He's like bringing out his tequila. He's like all this stuff. Mind you, I'm like handing off tequila shots to my manager, being like, you drink this, whatever. And then a block away was his childhood home. He shows us his childhood home. He's like, this is where I first wrote my rhymes. We get like the whole Netflix documentary special about his home and how he, basically came up and like made himself into something from nothing. And we just kick it the whole night. And it was the funnest night ever. We just had a great time. It was just a blast. And again, I'm thinking to myself, if he calls me, cool. If he doesn't, he doesn't. You know what I mean? No big deal. And the whole time, too, he just treats you like you're just as important as he is when he's worth like over $100 million. And you're like, I'm not at your level. But he treats you like you're at his level, which is crazy to me. So anyways, I think it was like a day and a half later, I wake up and he goes, hola, mamita. It was so nice to meet you. He's like, again, I just want to tell you, like, I'm still working on these albums. I want to connect you to my team. Connects me to his team. And I've, kind of been working with him ever since. But what a crazy, random story on how to meet somebody. Like, they're in costume and you're like, that's not them. Is it them? That's not them. Is it? And then you meet them and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And we've kind of been working together ever since, which is super dope and super awesome. But I just thought it was a really funny story on how I met one of the largest artists in the world at a random restaurant in Miami, which I don't live in Miami. I live in California. So I'm like, what the heck? But anyways, hopefully you found that enjoyable. Please share, like, subscribe. Bare minimum, subscribe, please. And I'll definitely have more stories, more to come next week. See you guys. Peace.